Roger Nightingale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is indeed, I think, a lot of good news in relation to the securities markets coming, but I think very little in relation to the economy. You don't need to be an analytical genius to look at the economics data in recent years and realise there's a problem. Things have been dull for a very long period of time. The politicians and the central bankers and the investment bankers and a load of other hangers-on keep saying, oh, well, in fact, actually, we're almost through this now. In fact, another couple of quarters and the problem will be over. And they've been saying that continuously, and they've been continuously wrong. They're almost a level of wrongness which matches that of the regulators, which I'll, if I may, to come to later. You say, I'm a mathematician principally. I've done economics degrees as well, but in fact actually the difference between the economist and the mathematician is that the mathematician is much more precise in the logic he uses, much more careful about definitions he uses, and that makes sometimes the conversation between the mathematician and the economist a little bit difficult. And I usually start off by saying, when we're talking about real activity, I say, look, there's a problem here. Now then, let us analyse something of the nature of economics problems, economic stability. Because it seems to me pretty jolly obvious there are two kinds of economics downturns, economic stabilities. There is one which is short-lived, and it's short-lived because as soon as it starts, it sets in motion forces which reverse the trends. And there's another which sets in motion forces which extend it. Which are we in at the moment? Well, it's been going on for 12 years. Typically, the short-dated, they call it the type 1 setback, lasts about 2 or 3 or 4 quarters maximum. If it had been a type 1 problem, which other people tend to call recessions, it would have been well over by now. It isn't. It's a type 2 problem. Other people, many people in the economics area, call it a depression. We don't get many depressions. We get lots of recessions. Recessions are part of the business cycle. The business cycle occurs every 5.5 years, and so every time there's a bad down phase in a business cycle, it's a recession. But depressions occur pretty jolly rarely. I reckon we only had about 4 in recorded history, and I'm not even sure about the first 2. In the years after the Napoleonic Wars, there was something approaching a depression. We don't know because we haven't got the data, but we have got, if you want to look at it, correspondence between one industrialist and another, one trades union leader and another. And they talked about bad trade, and they saw prices falling. You didn't get retail prices, you got wholesale prices. You looked at interest rates and they were low. You looked at bankruptcies and they were initially quite high and subsequently somewhat lower. And it lasted, this period of economics problem, lasted for a good 20 years. We can't be sure because we don't know when it began, we don't really know when it ended. But 20 years was a sensible estimate. There was another one in the final quarter of the 19th century, 1870, 1875, 1890, that sort of period, another 20-year episode. And again, it was associated with falling inflation, it was associated with difficult trade, rising unemployment and so on. There was a third, the first well-documented one, which occurred from 1929 onwards. A huge problem, a very big setback in the world economy throughout the entire world, and caused an enormous amount of pain. It was the first one, though, where that economic setback caused a political problem in the sense that voters in the democracies asked governments to try and find a solution. And governments, after scratching their heads, asked economists, foolishly, to find a solution. And economists actually tried all sorts of things. They tried cutting interest rates and making money easier. And it heroically fails to have any beneficial impact on the economy. And then up jumps John Maynard Keynes. interesting man in his private life as well as his public life, and he comes up with a public spending program, which they put into practice. He's a very great showman, was John Maynard Keynes. It put into practice, and it failed heroically also. It didn't produce any benefit whatsoever to the economy. It might have made things worse. Who knows? He wasn't worried about that. He went to the States, persuaded Roosevelt to try it also, and it also failed there. So it looked as if, I'm afraid, neither the money policies that were implemented nor the fiscal policies that were implemented had any beneficial impact on this sort of economic stability when it occurs. Best thing to do is not let it occur. But in fact, actually, once it has occurred, looks as if you're stuck. By the way, I suppose you could argue that Japan in 1989, but Japan alone in 1989 had a similar sort of problem. It had been growing quickly. Suddenly it grew extremely slowly, and all sorts of problems were encountered. And they tried everything they could think of. They tried cutting interest rates. They tried public spending. They tried moral suasion. All of them failed hopelessly. That problem in Japan seemed to spread to the rest of the world 10 years later, year 2000. And it's been with us for 12 years so far, and it seems not to be capable of being dealt with. It looks as if we are once again stuck in a big problem. And the chronology, what we should probably say, what all these periods had in common is that they seem to start with a degree of excess supply. It doesn't matter whether you call it excess supply or deficient demand. After the Napoleonic Wars, all the guys came home from the war, and in fact they were available to work and produce stuff, and it couldn't be sold. And although surpluses actually sound as if they're nice, actually surpluses in business are terrible, but you can't sell them, so you lay off your workers, and the workers don't buy stuff, and that creates even more of a surplus, and so it goes on. And that was the problem they had in the 1815 to 1840, 45 period. And actually it was made worse probably by the fact that at that period the Brits were beginning to become an industrial power and producing lots of extra industrial stuff. And we were importing our grains efficiently from France and Ireland and other places, and too much stuff, not enough demand. Depression. In the 1870s, it was North America, the US and Canada and so on, who started delivering grains into Europe. They'd always been able to produce it much more cheaply than the Europeans, but they couldn't deliver it until they'd built the railways and then in fact built the shipping lines to bring it over. Once they did, it was fantastic for them, because of course they were selling stuff which were at twice the price of their production costs. But of course it depressed the markets in Europe. It created ultimately depression. Same in the 1930s, the Japanese and the German industrial machines went into overdrive. Of course, we'd just ended the First World War as well. Argentina and Australia were doing the same things with agricultural produce. We had lots of supply, not enough demand. Phew, we had a problem. But in the 1930s, we did actually try to expand money in the 1920s so as to compensate. Aha, said the central bankers. Here we have a deficient demand situation, and we have no inflation. In fact, inflation is negative. This is the very time we should be cutting interest rates to the bone. This is the time we should be expanding money supply. This is the time we should be encouraging banks to lend to people and companies. And they did. And that kept things going throughout the 20s. So you didn't have the depression from 1920 onwards. You delayed it and delayed it and delayed it. And then, finally, it began in 1929. Why, I ask you, did it begin in 1929? Well, one of the clues is this. In 1929, the Federal Reserve Board raised interest rates sharply, jolly sharply, and kept them high for 18 months or more. And I ask, why do people not ask, why did the Fed do that? Inflation was negative. The balance of payments was in surplus. The dollar was strong. Unemployment was higher than normal. Why did it raise interest rates? The answer is fairly straightforward. There was misbehaviour in the financial community. The little insurance companies, the rogue insurance companies, were borrowing this very cheap money and misbehaving with it. It came to the attention of the Fed, and the Fed said, "Oh, look, we can't possibly stand this. This will bring down the whole of the financial structure of New York. I know what we'll do. We'll bang up interest rates. That'll cool the guys to heel." Indeed it did. They came to heel, but in fact the stock market fell and the economy fell. And once you had got those down, you couldn't get them up again, because in fact when you did cut interest rates 18 months later, no effect whatsoever. Why was there no effect? Well, one of the reasons was that the personal and corporate sector no longer wanted to borrow to spend. As a normal rule, everybody wants to borrow and spend more. But there are times in history when they don't want to. Keynes talked about this in 1930. He said, "Oh, this is a situation where it's a bit like pushing on a string." Absolutely right. You can pull the burden along with a string if you pull hard enough and the string is strong enough, and it moves. But if you want to push it in the opposite direction, you push it, the string buckles, no movement. Quite a good analogy. I've got a better one. It's an equine analogy. If you ride horses, you'll know that for the most part you get on a horse and the horse wants to go. Horses love running. So all you have to do is lengthen the rein, give the horse a bit of his head, and off he goes. By the way, of course, the horse is the economy. The jockey, the rider, is the central banker, and the reins are money supply. All you have to do is loosen money supply, and the people, under normal circumstances, want to borrow. They do borrow, they rush out, and they spend, the economy grows. You tighten money, you pull on the reins, the people can't spend as much as they want to, the economy slows down. And so long as the horse is frisky and enthusiastic, then you have perfect control over that horse. But if the horse is old or tired or ill and doesn't want to run, he wants to be back in the stable, then giving him a bit of extra rein isn't going to make him go faster. He might be ambling along, you lengthen the rein, he still and ambles along even more. You can slow him down, you can stop him, you can pull the reins and he'll stop. And once you've done that, you probably can't get him going again, because actually he now says, all right, I'm going to go and eat the grass by the edge of the road, or I'm going to go to sleep. And the message in a sense here is that central bankers have to work out what kind of horse they're riding. They have to work out what kind of economy they're operating in. If they're operating in the economy that is very enthusiastic, where borrowers want to borrow and spend, then in fact you can feel fairly free to raise interest rates. You should possibly be a bit reluctant to cut interest rates. But if you are operating in an economy where things are very unenthusiastic, where consumers don't want to borrow and spend, where they want to pay off their debts, then you should be extremely careful about raising interest rates, because doing so risks having the horse come to a complete halt. And don't forget, you haven't got any spurs, you haven't got a crop. You cannot make the horse go after he has stopped, as the Fed demonstrated in 1929. Well, we thought, that'll never happen again. It's pretty jolly obvious what went wrong then. Nobody else will ever be that stupid again, will they? 1989, the Japanese had something of a similar situation. They'd had a marvellous economy up through the 60s and the 70s, and really carried on into the 80s. It was slowing a little bit, but they kept it going with easy money. And they didn't want the yen to keep on rising, so they cut interest rates, so they pumped the money in to try and hold the currency down. Of course, it didn't have any effects. Currency carried on going up. But they tried as hard as they could, and they increased money supply as fast as they could. Problem is that all that excess money also fell ultimately into the hands of rogues in the financial system. The people, the companies, didn't want to borrow huge amounts of money, so lots of it was available for the rogues. And when the rogues actually started doing difficult things with it, it came to the attention of the Bank of Japan. The Bank of Japan said exactly what the Fed had said previously. Well, we can't have this going on. No, this is outrageous. We're not going to send in the police or the Justice Department or the strong-arm boys and give the malefactors a bit of a smacking. No, we're going to raise interest rates. And so they did raise interest rates, and the economy and the stock market did what, in fact, the American stock market and economy had done in an earlier period. And by the way, Japanese economy has not recovered. Here we are 23 years later. It's still in a bit of a mess. In that first 10 years, it was very dull, even though the rest of the world was growing quite strongly. Obviously, last 10 years, it's been dull, and the rest of the world's been dull as well. Message is pretty jolly straightforward. Once you have got yourself into a situation where you are expanding liquidity at a frenetic pace in an attempt to reactivate the economy, you run into problems. Because the frenetic expansion of liquidity doesn't produce the benefits to the economy that you want it to, and it does produce some downside in rogue activity. Just 4 or 5 years or so ago, the same thing happened again. You remember the Americans actually suddenly found out that all the liquidity they'd put into the system was being directed to subprime mortgages, effectively a semi-criminal activity. And when the Fed saw that, again, they didn't go and send in the police or the regulators. I suppose the regulators, I mean, they'd have made it worse. But in fact, they didn't send in the police. What they did was they raised interest rates. And the economy just started to go off the edge of a cliff. At that stage, the central bank realised actually what the problem was and reversed policies immediately and has expanded money again. But almost certainly, somebody out there is misbehaving again. Because every time you put the money in, you want to direct it to the good guys in society, the consumers and the good guys within the industrial and the financial sector. Some of it's going to go to the bad guys. That is almost certainly happening now. And there is a risk, there's a great risk, that at some stage, the central banks around the world will say, we can't have this going on any longer, bung up interest rates, and the economy and the stock markets will be a big problem once again. How long will it be before that happens? No idea. But I would guess that we have at least a year of easy money in front of us. Bernanke has just made statements to the effect that he's going to expand money supply fairly recklessly until unemployment comes down to a pretty low level. Carney, the Canadian, who's taking over at the Bank of England, says the same thing. He's looking less attractive now, by the way, because the Canadian experience doesn't look quite as good as it did when we appointed him. But in fact, he's going to be an enthusiastic creator of liquidity. The Japanese are enthusiastic creators of liquidity. The Chinese are enthusiastic creators. The only people who are a little bit cautious are the Europeans. And in fact, they're really neither here nor there in the scale of world matters. So we're going to get very easy money, and it's not going to affect the economy. But you can't do nothing with the money. If the money is created and it's not spent, it's saved. And if it's saved, it's passed into the hands of investors. And investors get the cash. What do they want to do with it? Hold cash at 0.5% or less? No. They want to buy an asset. And what assets do they buy? Well, it doesn't make much difference. They buy them all. They buy equities and they buy bonds and they buy commodities and they buy property, fine art, fine wines and so on. And they're going to. And they're all going to rise in price. They all have been rising in price for quite some time. A lot of economists find it a little bit difficult to understand why the markets have been so strong when the economy is obviously so weak. Crikey, don't they ever do their research? Don't they know that, in fact, by and large, the economy and the stock markets move more likely in opposite directions than the same one? It shouldn't be a surprise. It should be almost normality that they move in different directions. Because the worse the economy, as a general rule, the more the central bankers create the liquidity, and the more they create the liquidity, and the more the markets go up. Well, that's going to happen into the short to medium term future. I would think there's a pretty jolly high chance it carries on throughout this calendar year, and maybe for some considerable time afterwards. But there is a problem at some stage thereafter with the inevitable misbehaviour. I don't know who it's going to be. I can never guess which fellas are going to misbehave, but some will. And when that happens, there will be a change in strategy. And even at the moment, any sensible person is saying, wait a minute, we're doing all this quantitative easing. Try and work out what benefits it's had. Has it done a really great job? Are we happy with what it's done? And you can't be sure what would have happened otherwise, of course, so it's difficult to make the assessment. But increasingly it's looking as if it didn't do much good, and it's increasingly likely, therefore, that a continuation of quantitative easing will carry on not doing much good. Meanwhile, of course, we have Europe. We have Europe, which is, I mean, I think God put it there actually so as to cheer us up, because otherwise, actually, we'd find that this whole thing extremely sort of depressing. Currency, I love currency because in fact we just spent a lot of time on currency. What we do know, again, economics analysis, is that in fact no currency bloc has ever been able to sustain itself unless it's had political unity as well as monetary. So, what do the Europeans do? Go for currency union without political union. They want political union, but they thought they couldn't get away with it, so they thought they'd get away with what they could initially and come later to it. Perhaps, I mean, if you think they're very intelligent, it might have been argued that in fact they deliberately did it that way round, deliberately therefore allowed the crisis to occur so that they could then push for political union, and that is a possible explanation. But the other thing that you have to say about currency unions is this: that if you want one to be sustained, what you should do is you should take the weaker economy and you should bring its currency in at a pretty high initial rate. That's the way to actually get stability. You know that in fact when there is union, there's going to be pain and there's going to be joy. There's going to be one of them first and the other one second. If you want the union to be sustained, you make sure the guy coming in takes the pain initially, and that's the joy later. If you bring the fella in, as you brought in the Greeks and the Spanish and others, actually at a relatively competitive exchange rate, too low, he had joy initially and subsequently pain. And has he got the psychology to sustain the pain? Almost certainly not. I'll give you two examples of currency unions that have worked. One was England-Scotland in 1707. 1707, we have our union, and it's done for political and military and religious reasons, really. The economics and the currency were an afterthought. Oh, well, you Scots, I suppose, in fact, you better have the English pound. And so they had the English pound. It was a bit difficult for them because the English pound was, in fact, relatively high in relation to the Scottish pound. We were agricultural communities at the time, and Scotland, as you know, is only just south of the Arctic Circle, and it's mostly mountains. And so, of course, they couldn't really compete in agricultural terms with the English, in the same way the English couldn't compete with the French. It's obvious. So the Scots were in a bit of difficulty. They had to find something else they could do better than the English, better than the rest of Europe. It wasn't easy. It took them a few decades to find the things they could do. But goodness me, didn't it work well when they found them? It was fantastic. They found finance. They found insurance, perhaps in particular, in investment trusts. They found education. They found engineering. They found so many things. And from about 1730 35 or so, the Scots were outgrowing the English. And from about 1775 onwards, income per head in lowland Scotland was higher than anywhere in England other than London. They had done magnificently well. They carried on doing magnificently well during the 19th century. Then they blew it in the 20th. The Germans, in fact, Eastern Länder and Western Länder, as it were, they did the same thing. They made the Easterners join at ridiculously high exchange rate. They took the Deutschmark. Poor old Easterners. And for the first 15 years or so, you heard the cries of agony as the poor old Easterners had to try and live with this extraordinarily difficult exchange rate. Fortunately, the Western Germans were actually giving them lots of extra cash to buy the capital equipment to make themselves more competitive. By the way, the English never did the same to the Scots. The Scots had to do it all on their own. The Scots did it. We should admire the Scots for that. The Scots did it entirely on their own. The Eastern Germans did it with a great deal of help from the Westerners. Now, you don't hear any cries of agony coming from the Eastern Länder now, do you? No, they may not be completely competitive with the Westerners, but they are substantially competitive, and their momentum is much faster. And if I would make a guess on this one, I would say that in decades to come, it's going to be the Easterners who are the competitive guys, and it's going to be the Easterners who are the centre of manufacturing excellence within Germany. We shall see. But message is, if you want to do this sort of currency thing, make sure that you bring your difficult guys in at a difficult exchange rate. Go back to the drawing board. I think, in fact, the euro is dead in the water, and it ought to be started again, and it may very well have a successful future in the final decades of this century. We shall see. I would say one more thing on our industry. Because I think this is... You look at Britain and you see, I mean, we don't have an enormous number of really good bits to the economy. Agriculture is a bit difficult because actually of our geography. Manufacturing these days, apart from a few tiny specialist areas, is in some difficulty. What do we have? Well, we have financial services which are excellent. We have education, at least the independent sector of the education thing, which is excellent. You have entertainment, and you have, you hate to say it actually, but because I've stiffened my lips a bit, the legal profession actually has a lot going for it. You have these good bits, and that's where I think our future lies. And I'm just amazed that the authorities, the politicians, are so dismissive of the good bits. They seem to be rather negative in relation to the good bits of education, certainly the good bits of the legal side, and very dismissive of the good bits of the financial community. No, they save their love and affection for the bad bits of the financial community, for the commercial banks. And I say, why? What on earth do you think the financial banks bring to the party? I don't even regard them as part of the proper financial services community. I mean, Paris has commercial banks. Berlin has commercial banks. It doesn't make them part of the financial services sector. No, it's insurance companies and fund managers and hedge funds and mortgage people. Those are the guys actually who are the financial services. Those are the fellows who we depend upon. The banks actually are a little bit of an embarrassment. And why, when they got themselves into trouble, did we help them out as much as we did, is to me a bit of a surprise. I think it would have been better, probably, had we let them go the way of other failures in society. The argument against this, by the way, is, and I find this a convincing argument. Look, supposing you walk out of this building and you see a man with a big stick beating a dog. raising his stick and whacking it down and whacking it time and time. The dog is blooded and bruised and is whimpering in pain. Now, what do you think about this? Well, you think, this man is awful. This man is loathsome. I hate him. And I have tremendous sympathy for this dog. Absolutely right. Quite right. What do you think about the stick? Do you have any feelings about this stick? Probably not. This stick is an inanimate object. This stick is not beating the dog of its own will. This stick is only doing the will of the person who's holding it. We can't really blame the stick, can we? Of course not. Right, the parallel is the dog is the taxpayer, the economy. It's getting beaten up. Yes, of course it is. The stick is the commercial banks. It was the agent that actually beat up the taxpayer. And who is wielding the stick? The authorities, the regulators. Why didn't they get criticised? Why didn't any of them get their jobs lost? Why didn't they lose their pension rights? I remember, in fact, watching television a couple of years or so ago when the governor of the Bank of England said, big smiles, and I think in view of the fact that things haven't gone absolutely perfectly well, I'm not going to take my bonus this year. I screamed at him, as I often scream at televisions, you shouldn't not take your bonus, you shouldn't take your entire salary, nor in fact the salary for the previous 10 years. This man, the Bank of England, has actually not done a great job. This organisation failed to understand what was going on in the economy prior to the crisis and misanalyzed the crisis as it developed. At every stage, it's misanalyzed it. At every stage, it's produced recommendations which haven't worked. When the Tories came in, they were so cross with the FSA, understandably so, they gave extra powers to the Bank of England. Saucepans and frying pans come to mind. Okay. Bottom line is this. We have a difficult economy. It's unlikely in my mind, I could be wrong obviously, but in fact given the data it's unlikely to come right again for a long period of time. 10, 15, 20 years is definitely a possibility. During that period, what we'll have is dull growth, possibly but depressions, by the way, don't have no growth. Depression in 1930s, from 1933 onwards, had growth that was just about as fast as it had been in the 20s. It's just that, in fact, the growth never was fast enough to absorb all the labour and capital and finance that was available and sitting around. But the growth was there, and I suspect we'll have something along those lines, dull-ish growth, very low inflation, but we will transfer resources from the personal sector to the corporate sector. That's what nearly always happens in these circumstances. And within the personal sector, from the lower income groups to the higher income groups. Security prices will rise. They've been rising for some time already, and they've been rising on the back also of strong earnings and yields. That, I think, will continue. The fact that the investment community is dubious about the future means that, in fact, it's valued markets at the moment at relatively low levels, and actually that gives it all the greater potential for capital appreciation. It won't last forever, and if the Bank of England does raise interest rates in order to correct a problem of financial misbehaviour at some time in the future, then it all goes wrong, the markets fall, and the economy does go into a very serious downturn. But probably won't happen, probably we're okay, probably we're all going to do well, especially in the financial community. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.